Hi, this is Tim Sanders, and you're watching Voices of Authority brought to you by Upwork. Today, we have Tammy Bjelland from Workplaceless. She's the CEO and founder of this company, which specializes in helping organizations of all types, like yours, manage remote talent. Tammy, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about Workplaceless and what you do.
Hi, I'm Tammy Bjelland. I'm the founder and CEO of Workplaceless, and Workplaceless is a training company that specializes in remote work skills. So we help organizations train their team members, leaders on how to thrive in remote or distributed environments.
So how has the COVID-19's forced shift to remote work changed the way workers engage with their work?
I think right now, with everybody working remotely because of COVID-19, people are engaging with work in a really different way. And so for some people, they're being forced to work remotely and they didn't really want to. Some people are being forced to work remotely and they're finding that it's better than they thought. But we're all working in very different conditions than we would typically choose to. And so I think that that situation in and of itself invites people to look at work in a different way. And one of the ways that we're seeing that people are engaging with work differently is that they're really looking to their work as a way to sort of escape from what is happening around us. So work is a situation or an environment that we have a little bit of control over our surroundings and our actions. It feels good when everything around us is chaotic and we can at least have that little sense of comfort and security in the work that we're doing.
Interesting. Quick follow-up then. I saw research from the end of last year that suggested that the average remote worker is putting in 4 hours more a week than their office-based counterparts. But that was last year, Tammy. Based on what you just said, this escape from reality of COVID-19, I saw an unstructured survey last week. It's not going to publication yet, but its raw data suggested that over the last month, the average work-from-home employee is now putting in 11 hours more a week than they did when they were in offices. Does that jive with your personal experience in this situation?
Yes, having remote workers currently right now working more hours, that absolutely tracks with what we're seeing anecdotally with our current clients and other people that we're talking to, because people don't have other outlets. So they are tethered to their screens more. And they're also having to, again, adjust to new ways of working in ways that they really weren't prepared for. So there's going to be additional time that's needed to adjust to that. And also for people who are not used to working remotely and for leaders who are not used to managing remotely, it's possible that both workers and leaders are trying to put in more hours because they feel as if their contributions are not enough because they're not being seen. So I think there's lots of factors that go into working more right now, but absolutely we are seeing more and more people working more hours than they typically would.
I talked to a manager just the other day, Fortune 100 company, and she said for her it's a paradigm shift because she's never managed remote employees before. And she said, in my old days, we used to make sure and enforce people came in when they were supposed to, office hours. And she says, now I have to enforce that they unplug and turn it off to get some rest and some recharge. Has that been a challenge in your experience for managers?
Yes, that is absolutely a challenge for managers. For managers who have only had experience in an office environment, it is really typical to see them fall back to external cues for when people are working. And when you take everybody out of that office environment and you take away those visual cues and external cues, people feel completely lost when it comes to figuring out how to manage other people's work, to check in with their teams. And so it is absolutely challenging for managers who are new to this environment.
For managers who can't physically see their team members, how has this new remote work environment changed the way they lead?
Well, I think we're assuming that managers will change the way that they lead when they move to remote, because that is what we hope to see, because for those managers that do rely on those visual cues or making sure that everybody's in the office from 9 to 5, you would hope that they would find alternative ways of managing their team. But that's not necessarily the case. And that's why sometimes remote work can be so challenging for those managers, but also for those individual contributors that report to that manager. Because for a manager who is going to stick to those old ways of managing, they're going to be checking in all of the time on their remote employees. They're going to require that those employees be on video cameras, on video calls all day long to sort of simulate an office environment. And that's really detrimental to productivity. It's detrimental to our energy flow. And so we're assuming that managers will automatically change how they manage, but that isn't always the case. And that's where training and additional support and resources and coaching can come into play for those managers.
What you're suggesting then, Tammy, is there needs to be some kind of balancing act between using technologies like video conferencing and how much video conferencing people can actually do in a productive day, right?
Yes, there absolutely has to be a balance between using a tool like video conferencing and then the processes that you have to put into place to make sure that people are not spending too much time on that tool or exhausting themselves. And video is just one example, but we see other examples of an over-reliance on a tool as opposed to restructuring and rethinking your strategies and your general approach to work to really leverage the power of remote work, which we believe lies in that asynchronous collaboration.
Expand on that just a little bit. Asynchronous collaboration, for those uninitiated, give me some examples of how that would work.
Yeah, so an example of synchronous collaboration is everybody gets together in a conference room and you brainstorm and you come up with a project proposal. Everybody's talking simultaneously. You might have a whiteboard up and people are capturing ideas and manipulating those ideas with physical objects, etc. And that's an example of synchronous collaboration. When teams go remote without really thinking about the processes, they try to simulate that exact experience in a video conference session. So they'll search for a tool that exactly captures the process that they use in person. They make everybody be online and on a video conference call for hours on end. Whereas asynchronous collaboration is really looking at the process of of that particular activity and figuring out what parts of that you can do not at the same time. So can you be providing input or different ideas on everybody's own time and then coming together just for the decision-making part of it, instead of spending 3 hours of everyone's time at the same exact time on somebody's calendar. Can you instead spend 2 hours outside of that and be contributing asynchronously and just spending that 1 hour together, really focusing on the decisions and the outcomes that can only be done synchronously. So that's where we see a really big issue with teams that have gone remote without really thinking about how they can adjust their strategies.
What do you think are the 3 top challenges that workers are facing now as they've shifted to this remote work environment during a pandemic?
The first problem that remote workers are facing right now with working at home during a pandemic is the extreme work-life integration. So we're seeing remote workers really struggling with trying to manage their time, manage their duties, taking care of their families, taking care of their kids, homeschooling their kids. So that's a real challenge, and that's not something that you typically find in a remote work situation, because usually when we talk about remote work, we're assuming that children are going to school or there's childcare provided, et cetera. But with COVID-19, there are external stressors and factors that are really contributing to issues with productivity, time management, and just overall ability to thrive in this remote work environment. And then the second issue that we're seeing, or the problem, is trying to recreate the office environment in in a remote situation. So where team members are required to be on video for hours and hours a day. It's really not conducive to actual work, especially when we have all these other restrictions on our time, like trying to care for children. And then the third issue is information overload. So we're getting all kinds of information about all kinds of topics, whether that's work, whether that's personal, or whether that's the news and the pandemic, or anything related to the pandemic. We are just having a lot of information that we're having to filter and sort through. And when we're already taxed because we're adjusting to a brand new situation, that's not necessarily conducive to our best work.
Absolutely. To your point, studying information overload has been something I've been involved with since 2004. There used to be a phrase for it. It was called New Economy Depression Syndrome, better known as NEDS. And it was this unique combination of too much information and a constant state of interruption. And I feel it today because when you look at what the blog world tells managers to do, bullet point number one is always over-communicate. So give us an example of how you would refine that piece of advice, because I get it. You're not at the office where you have easy access to information. But to your point of information overload, especially regarding the pandemic, how can a manager create a healthy balance between keeping people in the loop and overwhelming them?
Yeah, I think one of the ways that we can address that is having a single source of truth. So having one area or one channel in your organization that people know where to go to for information. So with the tools that we have Slack, we have email, we have video conferencing, we have, project management tools. There's so many messages coming through, and it's leadership's responsibility to figure out what types of messages should go into what channels, and having that super clear and having those expectations explicitly laid out and making sure that people follow those expectations. Exactly.
I couldn't agree more. We're going to pull up a chart here. This is from the State of Remote Work 2019. It's a survey they do. At the time, it was probably mostly freelancers that were working from home or independent contractors. But basically what they found is when they asked them, what are your biggest struggles? Number one, probably not surprisingly, was unplugging after work. Number two was loneliness. Number three here, communication, collaboration, and distractions was a distant fourth. My question for you is, if they did that survey today and included employees now working from home, what do you think the order would be?
I think the order right now would be distractions number one. If we're able to, put COVID and everything related into that bucket. So I would say distractions number one. I would say unplugging, certainly number two. I think the last two would probably be a tie.
Yeah.
I definitely, instead of loneliness, I think right now I would probably say isolation.
Yeah.
I think that because we are all relying so heavily on video, I think that there are lots of opportunities for us to connect with other people. And I'm sure other people have found this phenomenon, but we're spending way more time with family now over video than we were, in person in real life. And so I think that connection is there, but it's still, we're still feeling isolated because if you are required to be at home, I mean, that's the literal definition of isolation, right? Because you don't have that physical interaction with other people. So I would say maybe isolation would be the third, and then collaboration and communication would be the last.
I agree with you. I think you're right. And I think collectively what it kind of speaks to is a rising sense of burnout, which is my next question. Tell me, how has COVID-19 exacerbated this trend?
Oh, I think we're just at the very beginning stages of figuring out how COVID-19 has exacerbated our burnout. I think that there are so many contributing factors to that. One is the fact that we literally cannot escape from our homes, and now our homes have converted into temporary workspaces, even for people who didn't choose that. And so having that, the lack of physical boundaries between work and home can be can have a really strong psychological effect on us. And then there's also the issue of, many people are losing their jobs. And so for people who are still working, there's that sort of survivor guilt.
Yes.
For those of you who are still working, and so you want to work more, there's the perception or the worry that if you are working remotely, people might not think that you're actually working. And so you have to work extra hard to demonstrate your productivity. And so all of those components are contributing to this idea that, our lives are so, completely tied up in our work. And that, exactly like you said, the lack of balance or the lack of, real integration into our work lives and our home lives, or an imbalanced relationship, you said, with our jobs. I think that's spot on. And I think that is because right now we are redefining our relationships with everything that's in our lives.
Yeah, exactly. And I often hear specialists in burnout these days say, don't call it work-life balance, call it work-life integration, especially in the context we have right now. And to that point, we're in a situation where being remote, it's difficult for a manager to gauge when a team member is headed towards burnout. So what are some of the signs or signals that team leaders should be on the lookout for?
First, I'll say that for managers who are managing remote team members, it's really important that you not wait for any signs or signals, that you actively and proactively and consistently check in with your team to ask questions about how they're doing. So don't wait for it to be like a passive signal of burnout. Make sure that you are asking questions and really getting to know how your employees are doing in this current situation. But if if you are checking in with your team members and they're not telling you immediate or directly exactly what's going on with them, you can search for other signals of burnout, and that's not being engaged with their work, mood changes as well, being completely disconnected or not following up, not communicating as they used to. But a big indicator of any kind of issue is any kind of change in behavior. And so that would be the first indicator beyond, actually checking in with your team.
So let's talk about the stakes here. I mean, what is the impact of burnout on companies? And how is that going to affect the productivity of the workforce during this pandemic?
Burnout can have a huge impact on the productivity and engagement of a workforce. So when you have people that are working too much, they are not clearly delineating, or they're not clearly setting boundaries and following those boundaries between work and life, you run into issues where the quality of work is not to the level that it should be. And so then you're spending more time and more resources trying to get the final result that you wanted to. You risk getting people who are completely disengaged and then might become toxic to the workforce. And that would mean, negatively affecting the overall culture, and negatively affecting other teammates as well. So the mental well-being of team members is essential. And I will say that with the organizations that we've been talking with, that is a primary concern, is burnout and mental well-being. I think that given the current situation and given the fact that we are in a pandemic and a crisis and we're experiencing something that we've never experienced before, I do think that most organizations are considering that and making sure that their team members' mental health is a priority.
What best practices have you discovered that help managers support the health and safety and wellness of people that are working remotely from home?
Yeah, so when we talk about work-life integration and previously called work-life balance, we are really talking about boundaries between our work life and our personal life, and making sure that we do have a clear understanding of when we can stop work and when work begins, and making sure that you do have other things in your life to balance out the amount of energy that you spend at work. And what we see typically is that when we talk about setting boundaries, it seems to be a very individual responsibility. So it's on the worker, or it's on each individual to set boundaries and maintain them. Whereas we find it's much more effective to look at setting boundaries as a collaborative effort. So working with teams to set a boundaries agreement that everybody abides by. And the reason that that's much more effective is because you're incorporating many voices into that discussion, and you're also setting a standard for the entire team, and you're creating accountability, and you're also including leadership in that discussion. And really, leadership is where you are setting the model for setting and respecting boundaries, because it does no good for an individual contributor to say, I'm going to start work at 9 and stop work at 5, and I'm not going to check my email over the weekend. You can set those boundaries, but if a manager does not follow those same boundaries or does not respect the boundaries of that individual contributor, it's really, really challenging for the individual contributor to respect those boundaries and keep them going. And so I would recommend that any team or any manager really refrain from making boundary setting seem like an individual responsibility when it should be a collective responsibility.
Last question. I'm going to look into the crystal ball and say there's this point where we decide to come back to work. Obviously, the world of work will never be the same, or at least not for the short term. How is this going to change? Is it all going to get better? Or will people migrate their habits from work from home back to the new world of work at the office?
Until we address the issue of having external cues or superficial cues of what it means to be working, I think if we continue to think of, putting in 40 hours a week as an indicator of work accomplished or good work, I think the problems will continue to follow us. So I do believe that that's shifting a little bit in society. I think that there are plenty of examples of teams that effectively measure work and productivity in ways that are different from those external cues. But I do think that we have a long way to go. And certainly when we all go back to the office, my hope is that now that people have seen what it is like to work remotely, they'll continue to develop that empathy for people who they work in close proximity to, but also for those that they work at a distance from. And so developing that empathy, I think, is going to be really critical in continuing to address some of these issues that we are seeing now and that we will continue to see when we go back to work, and then any additional issues that we haven't even dreamt of yet.
Absolutely. And I think that's the magic word here, Tammy. It's empathy. We're going to have to recognize people's feelings as facts and not just opinions. We're going to have to work extra hard as leaders to try to see things from multiple perspectives, because everybody's going to have a different one as we go back to the office. So I think that's a great place to end this. You've been a wealth of information. We appreciate your contribution, not only to this conversation, but what you're doing to help leaders around the world do a better job of managing remote work from home talent. Tammy, thank you very much for your time, and most of all, for your expertise and your perspective.
Thanks, Tim. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.